Welcome to Flames of Knowledge, a CFSI podcast where we analyze federal policies, spotlight leadership, and tackle issues that matter to the fire and emergency services. Stay informed, stay engaged, and let's get to work.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Flames of Knowledge, the CFSI monthly podcast where we discuss a broad array of national fire and emergency services issues with fire service leaders. In today's segment, we are going to cover the National Urban Search and Rescue Response System, including a discussion on the deployment of Virginia Task Force 1 to international incidents and the challenges it can encounter when responding to incidents in other parts of the world. We are pleased to be joined by Scott Schermerhorn, Deputy Chief of Operations for Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Department, and John Morrison, Data Analytics Strategy Manager for Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Department and former Chief of the Vienna Volunteer Fire Department. Both are members of the Virginia Task Force International Search and Rescue teams. So, Scott and John, thanks for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about your roles on the task force team and what got you interested in becoming members?
Thanks. This is Scott, and you know, I talking about Virginia Task Force 1 is really important to me and for John, and really looking toward what we do at the local, state, national, and international level. So for me, you know, I'm currently on the task force as a task force leader, but I came on the team many years ago as a medical specialist and really engaged with the medical rescue interaction role. Then I moved up and moved into some logistics management and understanding the logistics process, and now at that task force leader role. For the national system, I've held roles on the equipment subgroup, the response subgroup as a deputy subgroup leader, and now I'm the functional group leader for the FEMA USAR advisor organization, acting as the logistics functional group leader.
And this is John Morrison. I started on the team as a technical information specialist, so I deals a lot of information management. I've now moved on to planning section chief, which is involved in making sure that the team's documentation of the process that's going on and what we're doing tomorrow and bringing the whole team together and making sure that all of that works with some synergy between all of the different components of the team, and also the public information officer now for the team. So I sort of deal with some of the press stuff, especially when we go international, which is the bigger side of it. I'm also on the Americas region representative for the INSAROG, which is the International Search and Rescue Advisory Group, Information Management Working Group, which is a lot of words strung together. But basically it deals with how do you manage information, data that we collect to the teams where rescues are in sudden onset disasters when you have many search and rescue teams responding from around the world to disasters. And that's very pertinent back home on the FEMA side as well, with how we do a lot of we're using some of the same technologies, and we can certainly talk about that later in the podcast.
Okay, yeah. So let's, before we talk about Task Force 1, let's talk about the response system itself for those who are unfamiliar about how it all evolves. So, can you tell us a little bit how the response system was first established?
So, going back to the beginnings of the National Urban Search and Rescue System, FEMA identified that there was a need for specialized teams to be ready to respond to heavy reinforced concrete building collapses. Identified that the many local and state organizations didn't have the technical expertise, the equipment, or the ability to respond to that level of an event. And for that, specifically think about the earthquake and the large scale and scope event where lots of these heavy reinforced concrete buildings have collapsed. So 1988, 89, into 1992, the system came together underneath that national response framework and identifying what that looked like. It started off with a number of teams, 16 to 18, I think it was 18. And then it grew a few years later, and now it continues to evolve. And over the last 22 years, it's been at its current number of 28 task forces. 28 task forces spread across the United States, 10 on the East Division, 9 in the Central, 9 in the West, all kind of strategically located for hazard areas and for the ability to get anywhere in the United States by ground in 12 hours. So from an onset of the incident, the ability to mobilize and then drive less than 12 hours and be anywhere in the United States the continental United States, for response.
So you say spread out. I do notice that Virginia, I believe, has 2 teams. California actually has 8 teams. So, is there a specific reason why, it's not spread out, say more, why there's, centrally located, why California does have those 8 teams? Is it because it's earthquake prone or?
Yeah, so part of it was the initial who was interested in supporting this, what state and local resources had some of this capability and capacity internal to their fire departments and state organizations. And then some of it was, so that was the kind of the initial basis. And then it became, let's look at where the hazard areas are and where that can be supported. Yeah, you mentioned Virginia has 2, Florida has 2, and California has 8. The others are spread across a single for a single state. More so the California, think about California, it's obviously very earthquake prone, but it's also really big. So to get from the top to the bottom, you're really starting to look at that 8-10 hour drive potentially, especially in a convoy. So our ability to support that and still make the time constraints of what we were identified for.
Okay. You say building collapse, which I think is the core mission, but are there other functions of the team?
Yeah, so core mission, go to the core. The original intent of this team, large scale reinforced concrete building collapses. Since then, in the 9/11 era, we added a WMD component, our ability to work in that same environment now with some hazardous material engagement or WMD engagement. So the building that's collapsed that has some contamination that has to be worked through. We continue to evolve and identify where else we can serve and what is the top line natural disaster in the United States. And we talk about that hurricane and flooding event. So over the course of the last 15 years, we've really started with a still water program and a surface water program to become a true swift water program. Our ability to respond in smaller packages in that environment. So we don't necessarily need 80 people and heavy reinforced concrete equipment to go do water rescues on a smaller scale or scope. Additionally, we've added, to John's point about data and data management, the ability for us to really get real-time data back to not just the national level at the NRCC, the National Response Coordination Center, but also the regional coordinating centers, the state EOCs, and even local EOCs have the ability to interact. And then more recently, probably in the last 8 to 10 years, we've added in addition to our live find canine resources, we've actually added the human remains detection portion. So we can do and look at after the event and start to look for the remains that are not rescued and how that process is in.
So the core mission of each of the teams, the 28 teams, is basically the same. In terms of the number of members serving on a team, is that pretty consistent straight across those 28 teams?
Yeah. So when we talk about the FEMA system specifically, the FEMA 28 teams, each team is required to or deploys with 70 people in 19 positions. Of those 70 people are the core mission people. So technical search specialists, canine search specialists, logistics team members, communications, rescue, task force leader, safety. You go down the line of the 19, those 70 plus 10 extra support personnel to help move the cash and the cargo. And then, the type 1 response would be 80 people. FEMA requires us to be 2 deep in every single one of those positions, those 70 people. So that means 140, but allows us to be 3 deep and really wants us to be 3 deep to allow for people to be on vacations or to be injured or out at training. So the 28 task force members maintain a roster around 210 total personnel to deploy that 70, 80 member task force. When you look at 8 teams and local resources, FEMA has the model, and of type 1 is that big picture, 70 people. A type 2, essentially the same, but with a little bit less WMD capability. Then you move into type 3, which is 35 personnel and 10 ground support. And then you can get to type 4, which is in the 25 range and a little bit smaller. So it's a scalable NIMS, right? NIMS is scalable. the task force model is scalable. So the smaller organizations, local and state, that don't have the big FEMA system might have a 50-member team that's there to put out to a type 4 style response.
Who requests the teams to respond to a domestic incident? Does that come at the state level, or does that come at the local level?
So domestically, we obviously work through that local response, state managed, federally supported process, and with for the FEMA team specifically. So working through it, the event happens, it overwhelms the authority having jurisdiction. They move and request resources through their statewide mutual aid, any of those processes, automatic aid, mutual aid that they have in place. Now it expands beyond the capability of the state, and the state can reach out to its region, the FEMA region, to request resources. At that point, you start to look at whether this would be a presidentially declared declaration. Does it meet the intent of the Stafford Act? And how does that whole process come into play about whether task forces are deployed or not? If it overwhelms the ability of the state, they also have the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, where they can request state-to-state mutual aid, and USAR teams do respond via that. But the federal system is there now when it gets to the FEMA region. They identify, yep, this is overwhelmed, we can help with this. It goes to FEMA headquarters, and the decision to deploy resources is made to send federal resources to assist the state and then the local.
So how much is the cost of deployment is the responsibility of the local jurisdiction, the state jurisdiction, and the feds?
So from a sponsoring agency, so Fairfax County is the sponsoring agency for Virginia Task Force 1. When we deploy on a mission, Fairfax County does not pay for any portion of that. All of our salaries, our equipment, our processes are all reimbursed through the federal government. Getting into the language of the Stafford Act, there is the federal government picks up a significant portion, but there is the ability for them to request and look through cost share to the state and local. And that's honestly, it happens at time of mission to determine what that level of cost share becomes. Sometimes it's 100%. The federal government picks up 100%. Sometimes it's 75%. There's a mix. And then depending on your state regulations, whether it falls from state to locality or if they split some portion of that cost share.
Okay. When you say federal government, it's FEMA that's going to be doing the reimbursement, correct?
Yep. So through the reimbursement process, yeah, we are our sponsoring agency is Fairfax County. We're in partnership with and under cooperative agreement to FEMA for the domestic response.
So you respond to an incident in Florida. Your team, your rescue team. Whose command are you under? The local fire chief, the local incident, state emergency manager. How does that play out?
So the 28 task forces report directly to what's called an incident support team, an IST, and that's also deployed. The 28 national USAR task forces are deployed in this construct, and that IST is developed from members of the system. Essentially, it's an overhead component of senior leaders from the 28 task forces that then go in and manage the needs of the 28 task forces. They work side by side, typically with an IMAT or an IMT, depending on how it's framed out, and then have liaisons to local EOCs, state EOCs, to make sure that our response meets the need of the state and the local jurisdiction. Okay. Still underneath and staying within the framework of our own IST, they're the ones that would direct specific operations.
Okay. So, John, when you're at an incident, compiling data and such, is that data specific for Virginia? Or are you sharing that with the state officials? You're sharing that with the other task force teams? How does that all work?
It's evolved over the last 15 or 20 years. Now we're using a product called SARCOP, which is the Search and Rescue Common Operational Picture. And that is funded by FEMA and developed by the National Association of Public Safety, GIS. And it's really resources from around the country coming onto this platform. So it's not just FEMA teams, it's state teams, it's local teams, it's Coast Guard, it's across the entire response. And we're all collecting the same data, which is then fed up in near real time to whoever needs it. So it may go to the National Response Coordination Center at a strategic level, and it may go down to a county emergency operations center at the more tactical level of what's happening in that county. But it's all collected, all of the data is collected the same way so that we can share it with whoever really needs to have access with it.
So you use that in post-incident studies and such?
Absolutely. And it's there really to find out what the needs of the community are, right? So if we're going through a neighborhood, especially in like after a hurricane, we may go house to house and just, if that's our sort of marching orders, and talk to the residents. Hey, are you sheltering in place? Do you have any needs? How damaged is your house? Just to assess the needs of that community. And that's then fed up to that local EOC so they can drive the response of where the recovery operations need to begin. Where do we have people that need medicine? Where do we have people that are sheltering in place or that are missing? All of that information is then given to whoever sort of needs that information at that time.
Yeah, very interesting. Let's talk a little bit about training and equipment. Is there a training standard specific for USAR team members?
So the national FEMA standard is out and it's published, and all 19 positions have specific training that they need, and it's called general and position required training. So the general training is your typical stuff. It's your CPRs and your physicals and making sure that you have NFPA 1006 awareness, and you have the ability to really be safe in your environment. And then the position-specific training is specific to wherever you're working. So for medical specialists, you have to have a paramedic card, and you have to have ACLS and PALS and those style classes. But then you also get a initial training program for the urban search and rescue environment. So it's medical team training for USAR. So it teaches about crush syndrome and continuing care in the austere environment and looking after team members. You plans team training for John. It talks about that SARCOP and getting that information from the dashboard, but it also works through planning and the planning P. So the plans folks keep us on track on where we go. Logistics, it talks about base camp management. It talks about ground support unit leader stuff and how that all manages as the team. So every position has some level of general training and then some level of position specific training. That training continues and it's kind of the initial training, right? It gives you the basic knowledge to operate in that environment, and then depending on your task force and the program you're involved in, you have continuing education requirements. And that continuing education, it really does come down to what does your task force need to keep you up to speed. If you have a really robust sponsoring agency training program, you may have a smaller team specific training. But if you have a sponsoring agency that doesn't have, or a program that doesn't have a great baseline training program, or they feel that you need more, you're gonna train more on different things.
Okay. Equipment. I've seen pictures of the equipment stacked on pallets, ready to be deployed. So is there like a standardized list of equipment each team is required to possess?
Yep. From the FEMA side, the 28 teams use what's called the FEMA approved Type 1 equipment cache list. It's about 80,000 pounds of material, lots of stuff, including heavy prime movers, tractor trailers and box trucks to move your heavy cache, and then some number of smaller vehicles to move your personnel and tow your boat trailers and your UTV side-by-side trailers, those kind of things. But from the equipment standpoint, the equipment cache list is refreshed every year for small edits, but every other year for big edits. And that cache list really drives what our teams can do. It means we have to be self-sustainable, and it's designed to be 100% self-sustainable for 72 hours, which means I don't have to request anything from the local jurisdiction to continue to operate. I can work through it 72 hours through that IST, and we can pull resources from other places and not impact the local jurisdiction, which is part of the benefit of this 2018 process, is we can bring things in that don't further impact the disaster area. when we bring our paramedics in and their equipment, it's not just there to help treat the patients that we encounter in rubble. It's there to keep us safe and treat us so that we don't have to go to the hospital when the hospitals are overwhelmed from victims of the event.
So you said, I think it was 12 hours for deployment from the time the call comes in till the time you're deployed. So you can't really have that equipment scattered all over the place. I assume that a lot of that equipment is just specific for the mission of the team, not necessarily stuff that the department would use on a daily basis.
So the 12 hours is actually secondary. So the first, when we have the mission, if we get activated, we have an hour to accept the mission from the FEMA, the way the cooperative agreement works. And then if we're deploying by ground, we have to be on the road in 4 hours.
Oh, okay.
If we're going to respond by air, we have another 2 hours, 6 hours total to prep and plan for the air movement of the team. And then that 12-hour drive time. So we can be anywhere in 12 hours of drive time, but we have to add a little bit of mobilization time at the beginning of that. To the point of where's our stuff? Yeah, that means our stuff has to be ready to go, right? Our boxes have to be packed. A lot of task forces leave it on their trucks and it's ready to go all the time from a truck side. They're not unpacking and repacking and moving stuff around. Depending on your mission set, you may be able to do that. You may have your equipment packed on aircraft pallets and you drive using flatbed tractor trailers instead of curtain side or dry freight, kind of your standard enclosed trailer. Some task forces like ours, we're prepared for that commercial flight. So all of our stuff stays on skids. Think about your little Costco warehouse skid, 40 by 48 pallet. And all of our stuff stays on that. It gets packed on the truck at time of deployment and we're ready to go in that 4-hour window. So yes, everything for the 28 task forces really has to be packed, ready to go, and sitting at a warehouse, ready to be moved quickly.
You mentioned commercial airlines, and so that begs the question: when you're doing it domestically, mode of transportation for 80,000 pounds of equipment and your team. You just can't call up the local U-Haul and ask for a truck. So I would assume that you have some type of agreements. Do you have agreements with the airline industry, the military, or does FEMA take care of that for you? How does that work?
So the truck side, the task forces each have their own truck complement that they need and can get on the road with their own truck complement in that 4 to 6 hour range, depending on how they're transporting. When we talk about mil air or we talk about air transportation, you talked about both military air and commercial air. All the task forces have to be prepared to fly both or either, really. And what that looks like is a little bit different for each one. So for the mil flight side, about 15 years ago, we went through a process and all the task forces developed essentially a one plane model. So 70 people, not the 80, but the core 70 people, plus 50,000 pounds of structural collapse, self-sustainability, medical treatment, and rescue equipment that can all fit on one C-17. So a task force could be called and said, hey, we need you to fly to Puerto Rico as part of this ARM. It's called Air Response Module Package. It means you go to your aerial port of embarkation, you put your 50,000 pounds, 3,000-ish cubic feet of material on the same C-17 that you sit on, and you fly together and you go to that event. As the military goes up and down in their ability to respond and assist, as they have their own business to attend to, we've looked at more and more at really ensuring we have the ability to transport by air, whether they're available or not, and started to look at that commercial side and the commercial process. Typically, that's through a contracting process at FEMA headquarters. They hire that plane and go through a contracting process. But typically that results in 2 planes, one for passengers and one for cargo, because when you talk about 50 or 60,000 pounds of equipment, it takes a lot of space. Typically takes that wide body aircraft that is not able to also seat people.
Okay. Who serves better food, military or commercial?
What you bring. We're typically, we talked about that 6 hours, right? We're doing this on the fly, so very quick. And honestly, if you're not bringing food for the flight, you're in the wrong. So you're going to eat out of your little brown bag MRE or whatever you can bring for that flight over, because it's so quick. There's really a lot of things that have to happen and not a lot of time to do it.
Well, next time you're deployed, I'll run out onto the tarmac with some Chick-fil-A or McDonald's hamburgers. How's that sound?
The folks would love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about international response, specifically as it relates to Virginia Task Force One. What does determine when a team is deployed? You mentioned how it's deployed at the domestic level, but how is it determined when a team is deployed internationally, and which federal agency does receive that request from a foreign government?
Yeah, so we are one of 2 of the 28 urban search and rescue teams that have cooperative agreements with the Department of State. So it's Fairfax County, Virginia, and Los Angeles County, California. And that's a competitively bid cooperative agreement every 5 or so years. And Fairfax has had it since its inception. Really what it comes down to is the host government of whatever country it is has to request help. The U.S. ambassador has to agree that, hey, they do need help. And then the Department of State ends up having to figure out if we are the most appropriate resource to respond. So sometimes it may be TARP material or direct cash into the area or food or things along those lines. Urban search and rescue may not be the most appropriate resource to send. So it goes up to the Department of State, and the Department of State says, yep, we want to support this response. And Fairfax and LA are going. Typically, both of us generally go to every international disaster. There have been times when it's just us, or there have been times when it's just LA, but we're set up to be jointly located typically in some sort of secure area or wherever we can find a base of operations. And there are, we could go to any country. I would say, there's certainly geopolitics is well above both of our pay grades. However, we were the first official U.S. presence in Iran back in the early 2000s when there was an earthquake in bomb Iran. So I would say we're not necessarily never going to any country, but there are certainly times when if a country is involved in civil war, something along those lines, we're very much less likely to go because we don't want to put our rescuers at risk. Okay.
So is there anyone on the team that's interacting with the ambassador of that country?
Oftentimes the U.S. ambassador of that country is usually meeting us when we get off the plane. And that's happened the last couple times that we've been out the door. So there are certainly, the ambassador is ultimately responsible for us when we're in the country, and through their security officers at the embassy, the regional security officers, they're making sure we're safe because they know the country much better than we are. And obviously, if a country's been through a natural disaster, the security posture is much different because if people are struggling for food and water, they tend to act on survival instincts. So the RSO, the regional security officer, is working with our team leaders to make sure that, hey, these are areas where you can go without security. Here's areas where we may have a diplomatic security agent with you. It just sort of depends on the country.
Okay. So the deployment time, is it any different between an international incident as opposed to a domestic incident? You get the call, how much time do you have to, for wheels up?
It's fairly similar for the expectations, that 1 hour turnaround. The cooperative agreement is very much structured like the FEMA side for the Department of State. Generally, it takes a little bit longer because in a domestic side, we can get on the road in 4 hours. That's easy to drive. You can't really drive to many international countries besides Canada and Mexico. So a lot of times it's waiting on airframes because, if there's a disaster someplace, when we were just in Jamaica a couple of weeks ago, we flew a commercial charter plane. When we went to Turkey, we flew on U.S. military. So we are capable of going, as Scott said earlier, we're capable of going in any direction. And that's why we keep our cash the way it is, because we can reposition for any sort of airframe that we get. And that generally takes time for the U.S. government to figure out, is commercial air faster or cheaper? Is mil air faster or cheaper? And I think the faster element drives the way out. The cheaper element generally drives the way home. Because, we want to get there and be really anywhere in the world within hopefully about 48 hours would be a great goal. When we were in Haiti in 2010, I think we were on the ground within 24 or so hours of the earthquake, which was really, really fast. And that was the U.S. government saying go as soon as it happened because they knew it was a catastrophic earthquake. But some of these things may take time because, the host country really needs to ask for help. And there's a specific way that they do that. The U.S. government can't just send in a response team without that host government, requesting it.
Okay. So at what point do you know what your assignment's going to be? You just responded to the hurricanes in Jamaica. At what point did somebody tell you we need you in this part of the country?
So when we get there, we are usually working with some sort of emergency management authority. So in this case, it was the Jamaican Emergency Management Agency. And when we got off the ground, we hooked up with them, and our team leaders, or in a case of a large scale earthquake, it would be our USAR coordination cell, or UCC. Their job is to be that liaison and say, hey, where do you need us? We ultimately support their response. Just like we do domestically, we support the local response. We do the same thing internationally. Now, there's a lot more politics because everybody's sort of used to the domestic response and how command and control works. It's a lot of collaboration and coordination on the international side because we don't have fiscal authority. We don't have legal authority. You just have to everybody's on their best behavior. So it is a very much more political dynamic. But we have people that are trained specifically in that diplomacy and that coordination, and they'll get there and they'll ask the host government, where do you need us? Now, there may be cases where the host government isn't able to say that because they've been completely overwhelmed, or in the case where we were sent in Turkey, the host government's emergency managers in the city we were in, Adıyaman, were all killed in the earthquake. And so you're getting there and you're basically doing what we would do is you're trying to coordinate a response and figure out what other countries are in the area, what other countries are responding and supporting. And then you're saying, how do we divvy up this big problem into smaller problems and start solving the smaller problems?
So when you're performing your mission, are you pretty much working autonomously, or are you integrated into the country's operations?
We are so it depends. Generally, okay. What happens especially on the earthquake side is the USAR coordination cell works for what's called the OSOC, which is the On-Site Operations and Coordination Center. And that's a UN group of people that come in and then support the local government. So their job is to basically bolt onto that emergency management authority and say, hey, we're here to help coordinate all of this humanitarian aid that's coming in. Where do you need what? And then the USAR component is a very specific part of that. And so that's sort of driving the response. When the country says, look, you guys just manage USAR, go to this city and do good work, then we'll sort of take over. But if they say, hey, you need to go to this specific neighborhood in the city, then we'll do that. So really, we can scale up anywhere from we can coordinate the entire response to you're working on one building because the local government says this is the building we want you to focus on.
John,
here domestically, sometimes communication systems make it hard for one agency to communicate with another, be it local, state, or federal. I could only imagine that problem would be much more complicated in an international incident. So, how is it in terms of interoperability? How is it in terms of being able to communicate with response teams from other countries or even from the host country itself?
So our communications guys are outstanding. They can make pretty much anything talk to anything else. Generally, we're only talking to ourselves, and then you have those team leaders that are coordinating with other agencies or, at daily meetings, daily report statuses. So we can certainly pair with other teams. We're interoperable with LA, Los Angeles County, just because we work with them all the time. But if our guys need to add another frequency to our radios, they certainly can. And Scott, you had something to go back on real quick.
No, I just was when John, you mentioned that we kind of can take over that response. It's not taking over the response from the local. It's more taking over the coordination of the response for that area. We're not coming in from a standpoint that we're in charge on the international realm at all. To your point of collaboration and coordination, very much we can and absolutely are identified to kind of coordinate the response in a specific region, a specific area, but we don't actually go in and take over.
Yep, we're always supporting the locals for whatever they need during our response.
Language barriers. Do you have somebody on the team who could an interpreter, or is that something that the State Department, the embassy provides? How does that play out?
So it's both. We have people that speak any number of languages on our team. However, a lot of times it's the embassy will provide us those vehicles, because typically we're not flying vehicles, although we're capable of doing so. Our tractor trailers are ready to be put on a C5 and flown someplace, but we haven't really done that in the last 20 years or so. So typically the embassy is providing vehicles for both our equipment and our people. And a lot of times they have local staff there that are generally working for the embassy in some fashion or form that will then come in and support us, whether it be a driver or whether it be a translator. And they sort of embed with us for the duration of our response. So it's great to have somebody that knows the community and then can interface and speak the language that we may not be able to speak.
Okay. Scott, you mentioned something about how long the task force can sustain itself. For an international mission, is there a set period of days in which you must be able to sustain yourself? And when you're talking about that, are you talking about food, water? Are you talking about fuel? What does that entail?
Yeah, so for the logistics side on the international mission, the INSARAG identifies through our classification process. So we're classified and reclassified every 5 years, which means the peers from around the globe come over and evaluate us. And part of that evaluation process is identifying self-sufficiency. So from a heavy classification, we're supposed to be self-sufficient for the entirety of the mission. A little potentially unrealistic. So everybody really strives to be 6 to 10 days of self-sufficiency, and then what is your resupply plan? So most of those evaluations, you end up with, hey, this is what we would do, and then when we start to get toward the end of that, this is how we would receive those supplies. Some of that is coordinated through the UCC, some of that USAR Coordination Center. It has a logistics element that would be also looking at, hey, if I need to get water en masse for 10 teams, what does that look like? And fuel, what does that look like? So from a task force level for Virginia Task Force 1 and our international side, we take that 10 days worth of self-sufficiency seriously. It means food, it means it means equipment, it means enough bits for our breakers and sawzall blades for our sawzalls for heavy operations at 2 sites for that full 10-day period. So there's a lot of redundancy built in our tools where if we run out of one, we can use number 2. If we break something, we have something to back it up, and it's been built out enough to support that operation.
And one of the things, we don't want to be a burden on, whether domestically or internationally, on wherever the region, wherever that area has been impacted, right? So the shelter, the IT equipment, all of that stuff we bring, because you don't want to be a disaster tourist where you just show up and say, hey, I'm here to help. I have a shovel, but I need you to give me a cot and water and food for the next 7 days. So we really want to be as self-sufficient as humanly possible, because that's one less thing that the host government, whether that be domestic or international, needs to worry about is resupplying us.
So when do you know that your mission has been completed? I mean, what's the average length of your mission? I think you were in Turkey for a while, and I'm not sure about Jamaica, but what would be the average length of time for a mission?
For an international disaster, it's about 10 to 14 days typically. We are a priority, obviously, getting into the area. We are not a priority to leave, especially on the international side where flights typically have to be arranged. So we're staying there for as long as we need. So we obviously know that rescue after a week or so is becoming less and less likely, although there have been people that have been deeply entombed in structures with food and water that have been able to survive for long periods of time. But as the response picture and the rescue operations wind down, it's really the host government that says, hey, this is now a recovery effort. And that is a very heavy decision that host government has to make. And typically we're there through the entire rescue phase, and then sometimes into the recovery phase, not necessarily for recovery, but just for the humanitarian side of it. So while we are rescue workers and search and rescue guys and gals, we are also humanitarians. And so in Jamaica, for example, just the other day, we were towards the end of the mission, we were mucking out clinics that were filled with debris after the hurricane and putting tarps on the roof just to open up the clinics, which then takes the load off of the hospital systems. So we're certainly willing and able to be humanitarians, and we call that sort of after or beyond the rubble. So once the rescue operations stop, we're a bunch of people wearing American flags that are willing to do whatever work the country needs that's sort of going to help them in the road to recovery.
And part of that, Bill, is that these big events that we go to are not 2-week events. They're not 2-year events. Sometimes they're long-standing events, and we're coming in. We are very much the tip of the spear. Get there as fast as we can to do the most good. But that really, if you look at the 24-hour clock, that's like 12 minutes of that clock is the phase that we're making rescues and doing rescue work. So how do we set the host government up for success in the rest of that 24 hours that is that response? It could be 2 or 3, 5 years that a humanitarian crisis happens after a large-scale earthquake. That could take a long, long time. So what can we do outside of that rescue portion to really set the stage for the host government to be successful in long-term recovery?
And we've gone for as long as 3 weeks. When we were in Nepal, we were actually ready to demobilize after about a week and a half to 2 weeks. And then an aftershock happened that was almost as large as the first earthquake. And so we went right back to work. So it really just sort of depends. You're done when you're done, and there's no set time frame for, hey, you get to go home automatically after 2 weeks. You're there until you're not there anymore.
So many of these countries are hard pressed. They're third world countries. They don't even know what building codes mean. But from your perspective, do you ever see any type of response from some of these countries when they do have these devastating earthquakes, these devastating hurricanes? Is there that opportunity for these countries to do something to augment their structures, to even address codes?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a big part of INSAROG, that International Search and Rescue Advisory Group, is capacity building before the disaster. And so there are countries that are disaster prone, and they're aware that they're disaster prone. And so part of our responsibility is going through earthquake regional exercises or training and meetings, is getting these countries, hey, let's build up your urban search and rescue capacity so that they can respond to their own disasters, but then also respond to other international disasters as well. So that capacity building happens before the disaster, and then it's certainly probably on the front burner after a disaster as these countries recover.
John, you're kind of like the public information officer, are you not?
I am. So I have a face for radio, but I happen to be the guy that was dumb enough to stand in front of a camera one time, and now I get to do it a lot.
Well, that's why this is just audio and not visual. But I would imagine that it could be a little tough at times dealing with the media. The media is always after information. Sometimes that information is somewhat confidential. And so, what's your experience in dealing with the media, and how do you go about your business, making sure that they get the information that you want them to receive and to report on?
Yeah, so it's certainly a challenge. Sometimes people want a lot of information, and especially in a sudden onset disaster, when at the very beginning there isn't a lot of information. And so the Department of State has been great, and FEMA has as well, with their sort of putting us on the right foot to make sure that hey, we're talking to the right people at the right time. And so they coordinate some of that and say, hey, guess what? You're going to be on the Today Show tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Or here's some talking points about the overall response, because obviously we're experts in search and rescue. We may not know what the entirety of U.S. response is to a specific disaster. So we just generally try and focus on what we know. Obviously, politics plays a role in some of this stuff, and I don't do politics, but I know about search and rescue stuff. So we'll answer those questions, and I'll leave the political side, especially geopolitics, to somebody that's much more attuned in that than I am.
Don't want to get called out to the woodshed, that's for sure.
That's what I'm saying is, we're proud to be both one of the domestic teams, but especially on the international side, wearing the American flag and being able to represent the United States and our entire country in the first wave of humanitarian aspects. Like as Scott said, these disasters are very long and they're very complex. But typically when the dogs come off the planes and we come off the planes, we're the big shiny flash in the pan of the first U.S. response, even though the United States may be there supporting that response for years with millions of dollars to get this country back on their feet. We're the one that get the news. And so we sort of are honored to be that and to wave the flag and be there to help people in their moment of need.
And it's also a proud moment for us as American citizens when we see your teams getting off the plane and going into these very hazardous conditions, life-threatening conditions, and to see the work you're performing. You're not necessarily, as you said, you're not thinking about the politics, what form of government this country has, but you're thinking about the people who are in dire need of help and who are, whose lives hinge on whether or not you can get your teams in there to perform the rescue operations. So thank you very much for what you're doing. We're kind of winding down here. We've got a couple more questions here, but John, I know you are pardon the term, technology geek, but
nerd is fine too. I accept
for lack of a better term. But how has the technology evolved over, like, say, the last 10, 20 years to minimize the risk to the team members, but also to enhance the mission to rescue potential victims?
So I think one of the things that has changed significantly is our ability to capture information about what we're doing to support the local response. So where are we? Where are teams? Where have they not been? All of that information is now in near real time. And so satellite communication systems have certainly played a role in that, especially the low Earth orbit stuff that is now, cellular speed satellite communications. That certainly plays a role in it. So the technology has really kept us faster. I think on the rescue side, the battery technology has certainly come a long way from having to use, generators for a lot of things. We can use batteries for some things. And it really helps us a little bit safer, especially with carbon monoxide and a few others working in confined spaces. Scott, you're more of a logistics guy on the rescue side.
Yeah, so the technology side, making big rocks into small rocks, you need a hammer and you need, some power behind it. And what does that power look like? And John talked about battery operated, and there are great advances, but that with those advances also comes some challenges with, looking at the lithium ion process and what that shipping means for it. So there's definitely a midpoint where, hey, we need to be able to break concrete, and we need to do it in a fast manner. And what is the most appropriate tool for that? So when you look at the technology side, what can help us on this response? Can we identify the scale and the scope of this event much faster? So going to John's process with ICMS and identifying that it's not 200 buildings that have collapsed, it's 2,000, because we get the picture quicker from all the teams together, and it's more about that collaborative information. And that's done both to the SARCOP side, but done both domestically and internationally, getting that real view of what this event is, so we know what the right resources are, we know what the right tools are, and how those tools interact, whether it is, true old school, take a sledgehammer and break some concrete, all the way up to the search camera that's able to drop 30 feet into a hole and have a light and a microphone, and you can talk to the victim that's trapped deeply below.
Yeah, I think another part of that is when we get to, like, Turkey, for example, it was, if you look at like the Surfside collapse in Florida, right? It was a single building collapse, and it was a complete tragedy. And then you look at what's happened on the international side in Turkey, it was like that across in a neighborhood, across a region about the size of Arkansas, of just collapsed reinforced concrete buildings. So it is just a huge volume of work. And one of the things I think that we take pride in is we take some of the lessons we've learned on the international side and bring that back domestically. And so we're able to help and build the earthquake response capacity, because we really haven't had a major catastrophic earthquake in the United States in 30 or 40 years. So we're able to build that capacity. And then more importantly, those same people that are in there digging people out of rubble piles in a disaster, in a couple of weeks, they're going to be back on the fire engine responding to the 911 calls. And so that international expertise comes back into the domestic and local communities, to sort of make us all better and make sure the response for the next time is that much more effective.
Okay. Well, we are running out of time, but this has been very, very educational for me, and certainly hopefully it's been very educational for our listeners. Scott and John, we appreciate what you're doing in terms of your work on the USAR teams, and of course in terms of what you're doing for Fairfax County and the leadership you continue to provide. And we certainly hope to have you back on a podcast, because I think there's a lot more information we can share. But again, I thank you very much. And if you have any closing comments, I'll just turn it over to you.
No, thanks for having us. And this is obviously a very unique asset within the domestic response system. It would be astronomical to have these teams be fully funded, full-time federal teams. And so to spread that expertise across the local response and have them be local responders supporting the federal response to other local areas, I think is a great asset and really makes the system a lot better.
Yeah, and Bill, I just want to echo John's thanks to you and having us on. We're happy to talk more. There's always more. We're very passionate about this and very passionate about the response element that we are both a part of. So look forward to talking in the future and really supporting the national USAR system, the international USAR system, and even our local.
Well, thanks to the two of you, and thanks to our listeners of this podcast. If you have any questions about CFSI's mission, you could always send us an email at update@cfsi.org. We thank you for participating, and we encourage you all to stay safe out there. So thanks, and have a great day.